Hi, my name is Thomas from Complexity Guys, and I am in conversation with my colleague Matthew about complex issues such as leadership and social processes in organizations. In this small series of conversations, our topic is virtual communication and its impact on organizations, and we are joined by Joe, who is by now quite an expert in both technical aspects and social dynamics such communication brings. In the first part of this conversation, we focused on what is missing, even if the virtual conversation is technically well done. It seems that shared understanding in organizations requires a social process of meaning making that is severely limited when only virtual communication is possible. We are all feeling, to some extent, anxiety about online meetings that is often explained by the narrow channel of communication where some nonverbal cues are missing or are distorted. But similarly to our last talk, our suspicion is that even if we improve the quality of video and sound fidelity, something will be off. So today, we are going to talk about another essential aspect of virtual communication that is felt by everybody but rarely talked about. We will discuss to what extent are we acting when participating in a virtual meeting, and how this acting or performance influences our ability to understand each other and create trust. Jo probably spends most time of her day in those conversations, and we would like to hear how she takes this theme.
Thanks. Yeah, so I guess first, something I found a lot easier with working online is the breaks being actual breaks. So when I'm part of a conference or an all-day event or something like that, your coffee breaks are with people. And I find that absolutely exhausting. Like sometimes at the end of the day, I just don't want to see another person for a long time. And that's something that whilst I'm working at home, when I end a meeting, I actually get some time to myself. I can speak to my partner. It's different. And to me, that can feel like I get a break from the performance. But on the other hand, I can find those moments quite lonely. And we kind of talked about this in our last conversation about how in those breaks, I might not reach out to someone and speak to them about what's just happened in a meeting. I might just be on my own, or I might go straight into another meeting. And then at the end of the day, I seem to find myself thinking about the swirl of all the things that have happened in the day because I haven't really done the kind of any chatting or processing with anyone throughout the day. And so, yeah, I think I miss that kind of sense making that we talked about last time.
I think that something which interests me in what you're saying, Joe, is, and I think we touched on this a little bit the last conversation, but I think it's easy for us to be quite sort of black and white in our thinking about this. Like being in person is good, working online is bad. And I think what you're drawing attention to is how it's enabling and constraining. So there is something which is quite a relief about not having to be with people all the time, and at the same time, like you're pointing to, there's something that gets lost. I guess it's also interesting what you're talking about in this kind of like almost to use a technological metaphor, a kind of cut and paste experience. There's not the natural flow of conversation from one to another. It's like you're lifted up out of one place, dropped in another place, and you're constantly being teleported from one conversation to another, which can feel quite artificial, I suppose.
So something else that I've noticed is even in us doing these videos together is how before we press record, we might, joke around a bit. And then as soon as we press the button, we become much more kind of sort of serious and I think more serious, less likely to be more casual. And yeah, I think that's interesting because I've been recording more videos recently, and just even over the last week, I've noticed that some of the best conversations I've had because I'm thinking about recording more. At the end of them, I'm like, oh, I wish we'd recorded that. And I think that's related again to that. I know it's obvious, but as soon as you press the button, you're much more aware of yourself and the performance, even though I know that we're performing anyway.
I think what is maybe interesting is to realize that there is some kind of performance even if we are face to face, but we are much more used to it, and we are much more skillful in switching between the performance in the group setting and performance with our friends when we are during a break. While in the virtual setting, it seems that this kind of natural switching between environments is messed up for us. We don't know what to do. So we overperform when we are online and at the meeting, and we are switching off completely when we are off the camera or at home with people we live in. And this big difference is actually not helping the whole balance, because we might even get to a point where we feel that because we overperformed, we don't feel in integrity, we don't feel we have been truthful, and we don't have this outlet or this kind of balancing act where we can keep our integrity and perform, but in the same time say what we really think. And this sometimes even we would call it censorship, self-censorship is kicking in, and that's the aspects that we are not very skillful in overcoming. So maybe Matthew, can you talk more about where all this comes from?
Well, yeah. So I mean, I think there's some really good points that you've raised, Thomas, and that I think as you say, I think that being in groups of people is kind of inherently performative. I think that we're always unconsciously on stage with other people, and a big part of that is kind of us imaginatively kind of preempting others' responses based on our imagined expectations of what might be appropriate in that kind of context. I think there are a number of people who've written very interestingly about this. I think you can turn to the pragmatist tradition, particularly George Herbert Mead, but I think also people writing from more of a dramaturgical perspective, drawing on a theater analogy as we're doing, somebody like Irving Goffman. And I think there's some fantasy in OD that we can kind of strip that away. We can stop acting and we can kind of be with like the real thing that's really going on. I don't think that's the case. I think I think that it's an unconscious kind of process, and I think occasionally there's a kind of rupture, where somebody says something, which kind of something else kind of peeks through, and that can be quite disturbing and quite shocking. So I don't think we would necessarily want to live there. So I agree that what's going on here is not different necessarily to what goes on in person, but there are some interesting kinds of limitations. So firstly, it's hard for us to know as well as we do in when we're in person how others are actually responding to our performance, because our performances are disembodied, so they're limited to a small space. We get to see just this little box. We don't get to know what's going on with people's bodies, which give us a lot of information. You can't see if my hands are shaking under the table or whatever the case may be. But they're also time bound, not only space bound, in a strange way, because we switch on our camera and we switch off our camera, and we kind of cease to exist when we do that. So that means that I think it's possible for us to exercise a much higher degree of control over our performance, of kind of affective restraint. Of if we feel very anxious or very angry or something, we've kind of just got to kind of keep a brave face till we can leave the meeting, where it's much more difficult to do that in person.
So is this the reason why we find it more difficult to create trust over virtual meetings?
Well, I think there's something in that, I think that because we're aware of the degree to which we're able to control our own performance, and because of the limited information that we get from other people, which I think has a negative effect on the quality of connection and resonance that we have between us, I think we can also become quite paranoid that other people might also be doing that. And I think that's what you pointed to in a kind of like, we start to think if we're playing this role, maybe other people are playing this role. And I think in the online space that can lead to all kinds of fantasies, paranoid fantasies about, are people talking about us in between meetings? Are people chatting underneath using a chat function or something like that? And of course, we have much more limited access, as I said. So if we're sitting in a room and you're busy talking and Joe and I make kind of eye contact across the room, we know that we're doing that, and you know that we're doing that. So there's much more information for you to interpret. Whereas here, you have no idea who I'm looking at right now. And so I can easily sit here having a fantasy. Maybe, Thomas, you and I are talking too much, and Joanne is, getting slightly annoyed because she can't get her voice into the conversation. And I can let that run wild far more in this format than I would in if we were in person, because I'd have so much more information from her body to let me know, okay, this is what's going on. So I'm left to my own interpretations in quite a violent way. And I think that has a really erosive effect on trust.
So there are these deeper levels to what we usually focus on, which is the imperfection of the technology itself that is slowing down the micro emotions and gestures of people, and they are getting out of sync with what they are saying, so that we are confused with nonverbal language. But on top of that, there is all that what you have talked about, which creates a really sense of confusion and anxiety about what really is going on when we are communicating this way.
I've also, I think there's been times where, so Matthew mentioned this like kind of like perfect little box where you just share that much of yourself, and I agree. Like right now I'm wearing like slippers and leggings that are covered in like plastering dust, and you can't see that. I put earrings on because I knew that was like part of me that you could see. And while moving house, I would be in a room talking to a client with boxes everywhere, but just as long as I didn't move my laptop, then it would be okay. But at the same time, I've met my colleagues' children during the past few months that I met that, they live in another country. I might not have ever met them, or I've introduced people to my partner. So there is something about people being in their space that we do share more, because there isn't that the same physical, like geographical separation of work and home.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think it's easy for us to fall into, an idea that working online is bad for trust, working in person is good for trust. Like it's easy for us to say this technology is destructive to good communication or supportive of good communication. And almost undoubtedly, both of those things are true. I think that this kind of technology has its own kind of ideological underpinnings, which I do think often erodes the quality of trust and connection in conversations. But of course, it enables us to do all kinds of incredible things, to have all kinds of conversations that we wouldn't have been able to have otherwise. And as Joe, as you're pointing to, I think there's been and a lot of incredible stories, I think, of people working from home, working at a distance online, and the way that that's helped to facilitate far deeper sense of connection with their colleagues, people who've worked together for 20 years, but had no real insight into where people lived, who they lived with, what their interests were. So there's something about it that also opens up a lot of opportunity. And I think, I think we run into problems if we either kind of think that it presents us with a utopia or with a kind of digital apocalypse. I think what's important is that we can remain critically engaged with what might be going on here.
Well, thank you very much both for this conversation. I think there are still some topics that we'd like to talk about, such as what do we do with our bodies? How our bodies are participating in all that. And let's leave it for next one. And till then, thank you very much and see you next time.